Tonight, we will finish up part 2 of chapter 11. And so, our normal disclaimer, we are not all attorneys, although there might be some. I don't believe there is anybody tonight. Everything discussed on here is just personal opinions and may not stand up in court. Our hope is that we can have open discussion to broader audiences and have these ideas recorded for the next generation. There are some great high-profile boundary surveyors on here and even some college students across the country on this Zoom meeting, and I hope that we can all gain a bit of knowledge from these discussions tonight. So, as you alluded to earlier, Mr. Williams, you fortunately, you did your homework and rewatched part 1, so we at least know where we're going to start part 2 tonight. So I did not have the luxury of doing that. So I will turn it over to you, and you tell me where you want me to start.
Right where you're at, planning for field work.
Perfect.
So just to kind of refresh the memories here a little bit, where we ended up last time is we were getting to the point where we're talking about planning for field work. And we took a little detour the last few minutes of it where we talked about GIS and doing some sort of program. Connie shared what they do at their company with Survey 123 and ArcGIS and the app, and tracking section corners and preparing it. And I actually showed up on my screen our field notes, our field request sheet. We call it an orange sheet, and it just has a kind of a checklist of things. This is what.
Which one do I need to pick you up tonight?
This is what we need to focus on when we're out in the field. So what I'm really hoping for, and with the smaller group, we'll need everyone to jump in on the discussion. We're going to spend the last half of this chapter today talking about actually locating these boundaries on the ground and doing the field work. As we jump into that, I have, in the month we've been gone, I'm going to share again here a couple of things. I've got some stuff to show that I'm really excited about here. And we've been playing around with it. I took the inspiration from this chapter, and the last couple of chapters have really motivated me to do a lot more. And so our crews are going through and they're geotagging images and creating a kind of our own survey network tie sheet that's separate from, again, the county here in Utah usually maintains these, but they're taking a couple extra minutes every time they go hit a section corner, and they're creating a file. And so this was kicked out of Trimble Business Center to Google Earth, but this is what we got. This is a section corner that's in a roundabout. We got pictures going north, south, east, and west, and a picture of the actual monument. But we're starting to do this, hey, this is the section corner, preparing for the field crews to go out. One that's in a ring and lid, and we can see it there. And I was going to share one more that, unfortunately for me, brought more questions than answers once we got into it here. I think it's this one. Yeah, this one here. I don't know if I can zoom in or how well it's to see, but there's one with 2 X's in it. So I don't know which one they held, but there we go.
At least it's on the cap.
Yeah.
It's a start.
Yeah, and this is a witness to the monument, but
Did it both look like it's original chiseling?
It's hard to tell, probably not, but yeah. I mean those are pretty clean chisels. You can see the strike marks from something, but yeah, that's pretty interesting. So they're just with their Trimble data collector, geotagging images, downloading it into Trimble Business Center. But the cool thing about this is what we're using to kind of do what we talked about, taking inspiration from this class, from the discussion here, what other people do, and building on it. So I'm hoping in this discussion today we can build off of that and get everyone more involved in that discussion.
Is there a separate export file for that?
So we are just exporting on here. I can show you what we do. I'll share this other screen.
And so you're taking those images with the data collector as well, yeah?
Yep, everything's in the data collector. So Trimble Business Center, for those that use it and know it. So these media files are stored in the Trimble Business Center file structure. And then right up here, there's an export to Google Earth.
Mm-hmm.
I just have the most dumbed down version of Trimble Business Center, but they actually do have a GIS tab, and I can write features to GIS, and that's kind of our next step. We do keep a GIS web page in the background on our company site that has every project we've ever done. So if I'm in a new area, or it's an area I haven't worked in, or we have newer people in the company, they can jump on there and say, hey, is there any jobs we can piggyback on, or things like that. So we've actually are working to get this kicked on to that GIS page, and then we can use the ArcMap app on your phone, and the crews can then pull up, hey, I'm in this area, what's the section corner, what's a site control, and some other really stuff. So we can tie electronically all this in really cool. So I just want to share that real fast about a great win from this class, and your guys' inspiration of how we can do different things differently and better.
That is cool. That's a
So
great.
I think that's great. With that, jumping into the book then, 11:16 planning for field work. We talked about this a little bit last time, but I would love to kind of do a quick refresher and then throw it out to everybody else, roundtable styles. How do you guys line out your crews? If you're in the position that you're doing that, what does that look like paperwork wise and instruction wise? So verbally and written, or anything else you guys might do. And so we've got highlighted here the second phase of research that may be considered as field work is the field work proper, which is equally important to the office field work. The ultimate quality of the field work is totally dependent on the quality of the initial office research and the information that is taken to the field. And that's, I find that time and time again how critical. The information that is taken to the field. What do they have to do a good job? So I have some surveys that we'll pull up here in a second, actually kind of talk through it, but I would love to just open it up here, raise your hand, jump off mute, and share how you guys do it. And let's get some discussion going on how do you line your crews out? How do you prepare them for success?
Come on, David. Orange County's got some of the best, especially from these conversations we've learned from mentoring Mondays. You guys' practices are pretty good from a county standpoint. I don't know if you're in charge of laying out the field folders, but
I'm actually
Orange
not.
County's pretty advanced.
Orange County's pretty advanced. We have a lot of control all over the place, and I know that the crews have all that information at their fingertips, doing all the GPS network stuff on a pretty much daily basis type of thing. But no, I am no longer involved with the lining out of the crews. I'm an office guy, looking at mini record surveys. So my time for talking will be coming up a little bit later.
Yeah, there you go. That's awesome. Connie, what about from Michael Baker's side? Again, super advanced.
I kind of shared quite a bit already, but one of the things that I do is communicate with my field crews kind of hands-on as much as possible, or I mean hands-on being via telephone when I'm in the office. And I usually, after I do the research, I kind of identify primary and maybe secondary points just to give them a general guide. But I always tell them once they're out there and have done the recon on the site and get the feel for what they may or may not find, to call me and discuss. And a lot of times call me and discuss as we're finding monuments, because it's not always a decision tree with a single path. So when you have a party chief that's not versed in boundary analysis, it's good to have a lot of hands-on interaction with them. But other than that, everything else is digital for them. They have PDFs of all the documentation in case something has not made it into the survey request. They have a point plot. They have a PDF of that point plot overlaid in their data collector over the imagery of the Google Map imagery. And, once they get out on a site, locate the first couple of points and recalibrate, then all the search points are calculated so they can hopefully in most cases walk up to them. But with search points there's always issues. Sometimes you're close to spot on, other times you're 20 feet away because you're guessing. So that's always a hit and miss.
Do you guys have a checklist that you said it's all digitally? Do you have like a survey request form or a checklist or an instruction booklet you send out with them?
We keep it somewhat scalable. So every big project starts with these big project management. They call them PMPs. I forget what the second P stands for, where everything is outlined in detail of what's supposed to do. So there's a pretty good system of that information trickling down. So on a bigger project, there are checklists. There are kickoff meetings where we outline what is expected of the crews and specifics for the project. On smaller projects, we allow for scalability because if you go all out on every project, you're not always going to turn profit on it. So it's kind of nice that we have that flexibility so we can scale it to what's needed on the project. And I mean, we're pretty good at training our people so that they know what is expected as a minimum, and especially since our company is one of the companies that trains people for the union. So we kind of have that responsibility as well to train our apprentices and stuff. So there's extra effort being put into that.
Very cool.
Wonderful. Teresa's got your hands up. You want to walk us through what you guys do or questions you have?
Sure. I was just going to share my screen. Let me see if I can do that really quickly. I got a cool little thing that they do here at QK, which is really nice. Let me get it back up. We do what we call field survey instructions. And so you'll see it's a big task. This was for a big solar project we did about a year and a half ago. We actually tell them what we're going to look for the boundaries, what field targets for our UAV when they topo, what field topo they're going to take, and then when they're out there with doing the UAV tasks, what they're going to be looking for. So it's a pretty extensive list, and this happened to be in an area. Let me see if I can find that easily. This happened to be in an area where it's a big field, but what do we look for first, and what do we look for second? And when we set up our bases, and then where we're going to put our targets, and so that includes that part of it as well. So, of course, we have everything in a field folder that's labeled field package. You'll see it's done by quarter records, record maps, and then we give them a stakeout for their look points, so they'll have it XYZ data for the section corners already done, but then they'll have records and record maps with them as well.
Teresa, we're looking at your CAD file. Is that what we were supposed to be looking at?
Oh no.
Okay. No worries. All right.
That sucks.
That's okay.
Hold on one second.
You're
Sorry.
Good. No, you're okay.
Wish you would have piped up earlier. So this is a 2-page what we call the memo.
Actually, I was pretty impressed by it.
I know the CAD file looks great. We're like,
yeah, well, that's the ALTA that came from this file. I'm still working on it a year later, but that's awesome. A 7-sheeter for you guys.
Love it. We're still we're still looking at that. So if you want to hit stop share, maybe.
Well, hold on. Let me see if I can get you to the right screen then. That sucks. Let me see.
No worries.
Aw. When you think you got this Zoom linked, booked, I use Teams more often than I use Zoom, so that's terrible, but that's the way it goes.
It's definitely going that way, especially because it's so integrated with Windows. It's easy to just, log on and log off that stuff.
Let me see. Where'd I hide you?
I don't know. Zoom's pretty easy to use. I go back and forth whether Teams is easier or Zoom's easier, and
no, I agree.
Well,
hard to say.
Okay, I wanted to show you though this really cool memo. So let me see.
I'm
I'm
gonna
lost.
stop. I'll hit stop sharing yours and then try to share again.
Oh, there we go.
Now do
Share
another
my
share.
screen,
Yeah.
and then I'll do this one. Let's say that one. Okay, now can you see my look points and all that?
Yeah, now we're looking at
Okay.
a PDF of some sort. Yeah.
Yep. This
Okay.
is where
Perfect.
the look points are, and that's where all the UAB targets would go
Nice.
on this site when they do the UAB. And then this is the sorry, wrong one. This is the
You were doing your homework before you got ready for class.
I was. I always try.
That's awesome.
This is the actual. Can you see this?
We're still looking at evidence.
Okay, let's see where. How come it won't let me go here? Can you see my memo?
No memo yet.
I think you're probably just sharing by
Yeah, you're sharing by document instead of by
document by
instead of
screen. Window. Come on, guys, help me out here. Try it again. Let me
if you do a screen, and then you can.
I did screen one. Okay, screen two. Let's do this one. Let's try screen two. Now you got my memo.
Now we have a whole bunch of layers. Yep. There you go.
Okay, now you got my memo.
Love it.
Okay, so this is the memo. This is what I think is really cool because this is the most thorough I've ever done line outs and doing for the field work. And we do this as project managers, but and as person that's in control of the project, and then I report this back to my PLS, and then we review it before it goes out. But there's certain things, if you can't find section corners, what do we go to next? Must get corners, things that, in California, it's not always guaranteed that we have those section corners, and then we have to go out farther. So those are really good things for our field guys to have. So more data is better. And then here's for the field targets, like I was saying, for the UAV topo. And then here's for the field topo survey. If the conditions warrant, what are we going to do then if there's too high of grass, or what they can't do, pick up all fences. And then a UAV task survey. Of course, they have their own task survey line out instructions that they use, which maybe someday I'll go find that, but not tonight. Technology challenge. But this is our line out exhibit where we give them what they're supposed to be doing. So it gives them a really good check sheet. I consider this as a check sheet. Something for you to go back so they don't have to ask questions. They have it all written down. And so then it's something that they could, use to tab for index. And I know it's paper to a lot of people, but most of our field crews, they're using it as PDFs and documents out in the field. They're not, like 20 years ago, we used to always have all this paperwork. Now it's not so much. You're just sliding on the screen for these guys. So that's all.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
I love it.
Trent, how about you? How do your crews get lined out?
Yeah, we're still papers. We're still printing papers just because, we're having them write notes on there and what they found and that kind of stuff. So those, rather than more so a field book, ours is more the field folder. So they get full maps, 11 by 17 copies of the maps. We pre-calc everything as well. And we throw in the KMLs of the topo area inside of the TBC file, and then we're uploading and downloading through TBC. So when they go log, pull up on a job site, they pull into a job number, they open up their data collector file. It already has the survey areas in there ready to go, and kind of know their survey limits. And then, ours is still, most of it's 99% of our work is boundary topos for engineering design. So it's either that or altas, right? And so, but we got to the point where we kind of, even on an alta, we were, if we told them it was an alta versus a BNT, then of course, then you get a little laxed on the BNT side because they thought maybe they're doing an alta, right? So everything is pretty much shot engineering design level, all the way through, no matter what. So that way it's treated as the same, and there's no confusion between altas or BNTs, or we don't need contours on this one, we need them on this one. And so we get at least a little bit of a standard product when we do it that way. So
okay, yeah, that's kind of where we're at too. Everything's still paper. I think I showed this.
we do have I did go with the Surface Goes. I didn't do Surface Pros, but I went with the Surface Goes, where they with VPN access, so if they do need something, and something that we did some additional research while they're out in the field, then we'll load it up into the VPN, and then they can access the project files and that kind of stuff. But yeah.
So this is our survey folder. This is one that's just kind of starting out, pretty empty, but
yep.
Print out the deeds, print out the surveys. This line out sheet, I'll share it again real fast here. This is printed out on orange, so it stands out every time. It's really super clear that, okay, that's a line out sheet. Someone goes back and forth, you guys see who went out when and what they did. You can thumb through it and see what someone else did if you're a new person on that job site. We run with the Trimble. It's the TSC7. It's the bigger one that's got the full Windows capability.
Yep.
So they actually have VPN on there.
Yep.
So if they need to, right on their data collector. So that's great. When we're doing construction staking, they actually have the construction plans on that screen, and they can pop back and forth between a construction set of plans and the data collector itself. And same thing, going for a survey, pull a new survey, pull a new file, or anything like that, it's really great. I've made a bigger effort recently, particularly again reading through this book and looking at how can I do better. We actually outside my office here, all the cubicles kind of face in a big circle for our survey area. So we usually do a big powwow every morning. We sit in a circle and we talk about projects and schedules, and then we'll open up the surveys, and that's what I wanted to get into here. I know we're not reading a ton out of the book, but I'm hoping the discussion kind of builds off of what we've been reading. I'm going to share a couple more things here, and let me find the right screen. Here we go. So this is both the lessons learned and a win and a loss for us. This is a survey up in northern Utah, kind of very northwest corner-ish as you get into Idaho. Pretty rural, farmland, stuck between some mountains and the highway. And the survey monumentation is pretty. I mean, if you look at the whole township here, you can see that the west half of it, there's not much out there. So there was a couple of surveys done. Let me remind myself which was the most recent one. This Marble one was done in 2016. So it's the most recent one out here. Our site sits right here. It's the quarter corner. And so this is one that the crews had got done with their work, right? The ultimate mistake that ever happens. They got done early. They needed some extra stuff still to finish out the day. And here it's not quite ready, but it's not that complicated. Here's all the paperwork you need. Just go out there and hit it. Give me a call if you have any questions. And I pointed out, okay, we need to hold this corner here. They set a survey nail in the intersection. They've got some ties to some power poles, and they've got it. I mean, the survey is great, other than they've got their points still in the file behind it. Found railroad spike. There's a PK nail. So they describe what they found. So I said we're gonna hold this one. The north quarter corner is not in. They even say so. But there are some evidence to it. And then here's the northwest corner, the section, and they set a new aluminum cap right here. So I said, go find that, give me a call if you have any questions. This is a big open field. There literally is nothing there besides some fence on the east line. I said, walk around the perimeter once, see if you find any evidence of occupation or anything, a field line, crop line, dirt road, whatever it is, to kind of help narrow it down. But we're just going to go off of Aliquot Part and adjacent surveys and fairly simple as far as it goes. And crew chief goes out there, and bear in mind, this is my brother, so I can give him as hard a time as I want, but he's out there. He's like, I can't find this aluminum cap. Can't find it. Looks like they put in a new entrance to the road, redone the road or something, and I can't find it. And I'm kind of getting frustrated. I'm like, there's no way you're not finding an aluminum cap here based off everything I found. He says, I'll keep looking. So he looks another half hour more, calls me again. I'm not finding it. So then, then we do kind of like we talked about, Connie's talking about, okay, if you're not finding this, let's go out. So we broke down, the west of 26, the north of 35, and we start hitting everything else, the east of 34, the southeast of 34, and we start getting all this. And we ended up finding a lot of corners. But it's this, we talked about, we just read that line that they're only as good as the information they're given to go out, right? And this was one of those, hey, just go out there and do it. It can't be that hard. These corners are in. 2016 wasn't that long ago. And he couldn't find, well, lesson learned is it just wasn't sitting right with me, and I had some extra time. So I ran up there, and it just happened to be a different crew that I pulled with me in their equipment. And we pull right up to this one, and clear as day, that aluminum cap is obvious. It is sitting there bright and shiny. I don't know how he could have missed it. So I call him like, what the hell, man? Like, how do you miss this aluminum cap? And we start talking, look at it. He was looking here at the north of 34. He was stuck there because I didn't give him the proper line out, and he thought he was in the right spot, but a pretty picture like Teresa showed us, an aerial image with all this stuff, with all the tools we have, it'll be more than obvious to these crews, right? And lining them out. So the exercise then, that lesson learned or remembered is, okay, he's got to have these, and we actually sit down, and this is the way we typically do that is I'll pull this one up. This is the most recent survey. This is a subdivision on this side, so we should find some bars and caps. They show a fence line right on the property line. And this is from my most experienced to my least experienced surveyor. We go through this exercise. Okay, this is what it says. This is what the narrative of the survey says. There is on the center of 34 an irrigation riser. We should find some corners or some evidence near that. And we're specifically pointing out the things that I'm seeing on the map. Okay, and then we go to the subdivision next to us, and here's what they call out. They say they set something in the road and on the right-of-way line. And if you don't find that, let's start going back east along that right-of-way line to see those other lots. But it's this discussion, and it's not that we don't trust them or we don't trust the work they're doing, especially when they're out there on their own. But this is a good hour's drive out, hour and a half drives out. And for me to drive back there, and it was worth it for me to, for a number of reasons, but for me to drive back out there, or crew to, that can break a project. This was great. I'm glad I ended up going back out there. The other thing that happened was right here at the corner of this subdivision, they had set something, but in the meantime, they've installed a bunch of irrigation equipment there. And so any crew, even with calced points, would have a hard time finding something. And as I was walking out there, I actually talked with our client. He happened to be home at that point, and he showed me right where the rebar and cap was for this one. And I'd gone out there, buzzed it, walked back to the truck when he'd come home, and I was talking with him, hey, we're having a hard time with this one. I'm not finding this. And he walked me right to it. It was about 2 feet off my 10-foot search radius, just 2 feet outside of that. When enough is enough. He was just 2 feet outside my 10-foot radius that I'd kind of given up for, saying, hey, there's construction in the area. And so that's an example of how we can help them succeed and get these crew lineouts going. So that's what we do. let's jump back into the book. I guess any questions, comments, Jerry, John, anything you add, you've done, experience, anyone else on the call here? Give everyone a chance to kind of speak up if there's something you guys do differently.
Nothing.
No,
Right.
it all sounds pretty standard what most of us are doing.
That's great, yeah. Okay, Trent, you want to throw the book back up here and we'll go through a couple key points?
There it is. I had too many window screens open. I was trying to find out where I put it.
Yeah, I was just going through and closing them. Okay, so planning for field work. Let's just go through this checklist here. Specifying which monuments will be searched for. In the events these monuments cannot be found, specifying alternate monuments. Identifying what measurements should be made, and specifying the precisions required. And we're kind of like Trent. We're always kind of doing that utmost precisions. Because why not nowadays too? Base stations are easy enough to set up. VRS is readily available. We're always trying to hit that higher mark, so then there's never any questions. We've got to go back through and redo things. Just kind of reading some key points here. The surveyor should make certain that the field party is furnished with adequate and necessary maps, plats, topography sheets, aerial photographs, deeds, road surveys, and any other information. And this, to me, this point right here is so important, not just for how we're lining them out for success, but as I sit down with my senior crew chiefs and we go over these plats, there's questions that come up that can be answered about boundary law and boundary resolution and helping them prepare then to become the licensed guys. It's not just, here, this is what I need out in the field, taking that time to train with them. And why do we need that? What are, there's a great opportunity to go hand in hand with getting the field work done and then raising up the next surveyor. Jumping over to 11:17, there's a great example, sample field instructions here, and we've kind of looked at that and gone over it, so I don't want to hash it out too much more. But 11:17, field evidence. Collection of field evidence in the field consists of three things: finding monuments or other memorials, tying these together with the measurements, new measurements, and tying lines of possessions to the found monuments. I think this is a pretty good outline of how field work should be done. I'll say that pretty generally, but field crews should go out there and the first thing they do is establish their control. Tie to the monuments, get set up, get a feel for the project. What issues are you going to have before you actually get into the general field work of locating all the other evidence? Section 11:18, search for monuments. So in principle 12 here, in a description, no one corner, whether monumented or not, is superior to any other corner. Each has equal survey and legal weight in retracing a description. And so we spend as much time as needed for every corner equally to find that. This is another part when we sit down with the crews. I've had quite a few surveys recently that call out to a fence line or a road right of way. And so we're taking these calls, the monument calls, the natural monument calls, if you will, and we're saying, look, this deed calls for this, so this is something specific I need, where crews aren't necessarily in the habit of reading the deeds, even though they're furnished with them, to point out those particular points. It's critical to help them find all that. Principle 13, we've kind of read through these last time, except where a senior right is interfered with, record or legal monuments, if called for in a conveyance, and if found undisturbed, indicate the true intent of the original parties, and as such, control. If called for monuments cannot be found, or if they are found disturbed, their former position may be identified by competent witness testimony or acceptable physical indicators and boundaries. And that's where that landowner helped me find that rebar last week. He knew where it was. The occupation wasn't clear. The descriptions weren't clear because it was just a quarter section. But for him to actually show where an adjacent survey or plat had set a monument was was paramount to resolving the issues I had found there. This checklist here in retracement principle 13 emphasizes that armed with adequate record data, a field search should be made to find the monuments called for in the document or locate the former position of these monuments. This should be done based on the following: discovery of the monument itself or accessories to the monument, other monuments set to perpetuate the position of the original monument, and supported by adequate and sufficient writings, competent witness testimony, reputation, and uncalled for monuments. So this is where I'm going to throw out another kind of question to the group here. With your field crews, what procedures do you guys have for actually talking to the landowner or neighbors? You know, maybe not, I'm thinking the unsolicited type, like, or the solicited type. You might have the crew out there and every neighbor asks them what they're doing, but what procedures do you guys have for your field crews to go talk to neighbors? Or is that something you reserve for yourselves if it gets difficult?
Ours is, you know, if we're just having to try to get on adjoining properties, ours is knocking on doors, right? I mean, just old fashioned way, and hope, you know, everybody's pretty much got Ring doorbells now too. So you can at least, even if they're not home, you can at least maybe, you know, talk to them through a ring or some situation, right? So ours is just old school again, knocking on doors. But
yep, that's what we do. I mean, I'm the requirement of our crews is we will let the client know what day we're going to be out there,
right?
But they should still knock on the door and let them know, hey, we're here. Is there anything you can show us? Because depending on how you ask that question or walk the site with a client, new information all of a sudden comes up that they're walking in that back corner with the surveyor, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I remember that something here, right? And so it helps. Let's see, my light just went off again. They've got the automatic light here, and I can't, never wants to turn on for me, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'm wondering, like, I know there's some different states, and different states have kind of rules and regulations when it comes to notice, but
Do you just contact the neighbors if you're going to go onto their property to ask permission, or do you contact them in general when you show up on a site to let them know that you're going to be there doing a survey?
ours
Generally
is
just our client to start with.
And then if we need to go on adjoining properties, then we'll knock on adjoining properties. But
Okay.
yeah, we're definitely not knocking on 5 or 6 doors and going, "Hey, we're here. You want to come out and play?"
Now it doesn't want to turn on for me. Yeah, if it gets to the point that we really need to get in with the neighbors to get additional evidence or testimony, I rely on our client to set up those meetings and set up those discussions. I try not to cold call a neighbor and say, hey, we're doing a survey next door, because that can open a can of worms. That, well, why is it needed? What is my neighbor wants to steal my property and they're hiring you to do it? So when we get to that point, again, in that length of a survey that you're chasing the evidence, you get the basic survey done and it's not working out for you and you need more evidence, and you hit that stop button with a client and have the discussion. This is where we're at. This is the issues we're having. Can you help me resolve it by, let's talk with the neighbors, you know, let's talk with whoever it might be to get more information. Then we start those discussions. But again, I'm usually relying on the client to begin those discussions or set up the meeting.
I take a little bit different approach. If I know I'm going to be in an entire neighborhood and I'm going to be poking in people's yards, I'll send a mailer out a week before we go to everybody in the neighborhood. We're going to be there, and you'd be surprised how many times people will call up and say, you know, I have a pipe in my backyard, or I know where some of this stuff is. And you get quite a bit of help from the neighborhood that way. Of course, there is, like you said, Trent, sometimes people get a little burnt, you know, they've been burned by a surveyor before, or they have a bad experience or something. And so there's a little negative connotation, and I prefer to be in front of that rather than let my client deal with that. I think it's better for me to have that conversation and talk them off the ledge, and keep things kind of calm, because sometimes neighbors are not the greatest in talking with each other. And so it depends. I guess it's scalable, but if I know I'm going to be in the entire neighborhood, I do that at times. Still, present ourselves to everybody as we show up on site.
You kind of wonder where the responsibility for notification goes. When you have underground utilities, you might be putting pipes in the ground. Who contacts the underground utilities? We have what's called Diggers Hotline here, and I'm sure other states have something like that. We contact the utilities, come out there, and they mark all their utility lines. Who's responsible for that when you go out and do a survey? Are you leaving that in the client's hand, or are you taking on responsibility for that? See, Wisconsin's responsibility of the surveyor. Anybody that's going to be doing the actual disturbance of this stuff, it's the surveyor's responsibility to notify all the respective parties that are going to be affected by that. So my question is where does the surveyor's responsibility stop and the neighbors or the clients begin? So who does the actual conversing with the neighbors? Is it you let your client talk to them first? Or do you actually tell them, because you're going to be affecting their boundaries also in the process? And like I say, you don't want to walk into an adversarial situation, because I've had it happen. I've had shotguns waved at me when there wasn't proper notification with all the neighbors and that, because there is that bad blood between the two parties, or there could potentially be bad blood between them. So there's always that type of situation. What kind of situation are you putting your field crews in?
True.
Yeah, that's a tough one. A lot of it's going to be case to case, right? If it's a simple lot survey that's pretty cut and dry, I'll say I take less precaution with that, if you will, in that scenario. But if I know there's a boundary dispute, if I know it's an area that's got more challenges, then I am having those discussions beforehand. That there's kind of a sliding scale, I guess, there of familiarity with the project or the needs of that project.
Right, but I guess it goes partially back to the information that you send your field crews out with. Right. How prepared are they to deal with that when you're not there, as the buffer, as the person that's got the experience doing that type of stuff?
Absolutely. And so we've got to let them know. I know I've gone out on sites where particularly I know that is an issue. Or, in our development world, I've got clients that are actively working to develop a land where there are boundary disputes, and they've got a land guy out there that's already had the discussion with a neighbor, where I know that discussion's happening. So we'll request that client has his land guy out there who's already got a relationship. So if anything does pop up, he's there, the crews have his number in those cases.
Yeah, for us, the company policy is that the project manager needs to secure crews access to the property. Unfortunately, we do a lot of commercial and land development projects, so we don't deal with the individual homeowners very often. But sometimes they're abutting your property, and if needed, it's the project manager's responsibility to understand the relationships and whether the crew is at liberty to walk around and look for the monuments, or if there is special permission or notice needed. It involves the safety of the crew, because it's not always, sometimes the people are aggravated, but sometimes you can run into unsecured pets that will harm the crew. So our policy is to be prepared for these things, and each site is a little different individually. Now, California has is a right of entry state, and our PLS Act says that whenever possible, a reasonable notice should be given to the homeowner when you're having to access their property, and that you can't damage their property. So the ultimate responsibility lies with a surveyor. But yes, we're at the same time allowed to take advantage of potential relationship between your client and their neighbors to facilitate this.
But like the California entry 8774 says though that you don't have to give them, informed notice. You can show up and do your survey without prior notice to them. They don't have to be notified ahead of time. I mean, I think that's kind of crazy, but that's one of the things I read in your right of entry was you don't have to, like one of the gentlemen stated, give them a week's notice or whatever, you inform the owner, but it doesn't matter about the owners to the right or the left. You don't have to give them prior notification. It behooves us to do that to get compliance, but it's not contingent about prior notice to the owner or tenant. It's not contingent on that. We could still we could still go on other people's property to do the survey.
As long as it's a boundary related survey.
Correct.
Yeah. I have found too that you're probably reading a pamphlet, but we have pamphlets that have the, state the different, there's 3 codes in California code that allow us onto land during a boundary survey. And all of our trucks have those. And we hand those out if people have an issue. And if they still have issue, then a project manager will show up usually with a peace officer, and we keep the peace and we give the officer that pamphlet and review it with them. And then they basically just keep the peace while we do our work and get out of there. If it comes to that. And it's rare, but it does happen where you have to get an officer out there to just keep everybody calm so that we can do our job and get out.
I will say Wisconsin's the only place I've been really chased off someone's land with threat of injury. But I've definitely had surveys where we do need a peace officer there to kind of help things through. But when I got licensed in Wisconsin, I don't know if it was my license or when I registered with the state society, but we actually had a little card they gave us that had the state code on there that I always carried with me, so I could remember that.
Yeah, our state association has those cards that can be ordered through them, or it can be some companies print them as business cards. I have the code in front of me here. Let me just read it real quick. The right of entry upon or to real property to investigate and utilize boundary evidence and to perform surveys is a right of persons legally authorized to practice land surveying, and it is the responsibility of the owner or tenant who owns or controls the property to provide reasonable access without undue delay. The right of entry is not contingent upon the provision of prior notice to the owner or tenant. However, the owner or tenant shall be notified of the proposed time of entry where practicable.
No.
It's important to do that. When I was on the Standards and Ethics Committee in Wisconsin, we reviewed a case where notice was not given and there was some damage done. And it was not really clear if the surveyor did the damage or not, though it was assumed it was the surveyor. And without notice given, right, he'd been found back there, but without notice given, you do set yourself up for some liability there for the damages, and you've
got right of entry in Wisconsin, but you're still held liable for any damages that you do, whether you notify or not. You're still liable for damages.
Yeah, but giving that notice, and having them home to watch it or observe if needed, can relieve you of some of that, liability if something was damaged but it wasn't you, right? You have some a safety net there by giving notice for sure. Okay, great discussion. I love it. There's a lot that can be discussed in right of entry and trespass laws. And I know Utah's over the last few years have kind of changed, and there was discussion because a lot of issues happen with four-wheelers through Utah, and there's so that right of entry gets that's a hot button issue. Let's say that.
We just on that same topic, we as part of the Westfed board, we have a gentleman who's doing his master's thesis, and he's going to do the whole research project on our Western 13 states as part of Westfed. And his master's is going to be based on the research and doing all the research for all 13 Western states when it comes to right of entry access and trespasses and stuff like that. So it's probably, I mean, we're probably 6-9 months away before he's done with his project or whatever, probably 12 months, but we may have some good information from like a West Coast right of entry issues. So
that would be great.
Yeah, that'll be cool when we have that one. So that's something we're working on with Westfed.
Okay. Well, rolling through here then the rest of the chapter here, I think we're just going to hit some of the key points. We've talked a little bit about each of these, so I want to roll through them. 1120, importance of possession. This is huge. This is also up for interpretation a little bit, but I asked the crews to shoot a mow line, right? If that's the best evidence of possession, where are they mowing to? What is there visually that's there that shows it? The principle says possession may memorialize original survey lines, and as such may be the best or worst evidence of original lines. And so we can look at fences, we can look at just occupation, crop lines in a field, mow lines in a yard. There's so much we can talk about the importance of possession when retracing a boundary survey. I think that's all I had to throw out of that one. I guess I will throw this, old fence lines, just remind me there, look at the picture. You're looking for wire that's on the ground in a field. That's one I've used in the past to kind of show possession. The fence may not be there, but the barbed wire is actually laying down. Then we get to 1121, testimony. We talked about this, but just talking with the neighbors, talking with the client, talking with people that are familiar with the area. And we've talked about this even in the history portion of this book. But those that know it, and that definitely helps. Those who have been there longer can tell you, yeah, I remember when we put up this fence. I remember why we did it. We moved it for this. 1122, measurements. At least one corner recited in the deed must be proved before measurements can commence. After discovery of that first proven monument, the processes of searching and measuring are often done simultaneously. Measurements are but one form of evidence and may indicate likely places to search for other monuments. Early in the search for monuments, it may be advantageous to make quick approximate measurements until a suitable starting monument is found, but usually it may be a waste of time to make approximate measurements, find the corner, then measure precisely. It is often better to measure carefully and find the monument, and then to tie in the monument and to correct measurement to the true line of computation. And this goes into kind of what I said before, is our method to the way the crews do it, whether it's a property corner or a section corner monument. Spend the time to get set up, break down the section, break down the quarter section, get set up and get localized so that you feel good about what you're doing. So when you're making these measurements, when you're going around the exterior of a survey, Trent said that he gives them a KMZ. We put a DXF in our data collector, and so once they get set up, they kind of have this bounds to work in. But if they're not set up right to begin with, that bounds could be way off, and they may not even be surveying in the right area. And so getting set up and tight with your control or your monuments or whatever it might be helps get the rest of the survey going with accuracy and with ease. Uncertainty of position caused by measurements. An original monument found undisturbed usually expresses the intent of the parties of the conveyance, fixes that point as between the parties, and as such has no error in position. All restored monuments established by measurements have some error in position. And that's because it's been measured. There's error in measurement. That reset monument is not an obvious spot, and not a perfect spot. It's open to interpretation, if you will. 1124, permissible uncertainty of measurements. The magnitude of permissible uncertainty of measurements is always determined by a court's interpretation. Anyone read 1124 and have thoughts? Get into that one? Do we want to spend time on this principle in depth? Okay. 1124, 1125, and 1126 is, and we've talked quite a bit about this, but I want to get back into our kind of discussion we had at the beginning. We talked about preparing our field crews to go out, but what about when they come in? And kind of have the same roundtable discussion here. So preservation of recorded evidence, found physical evidence, including monuments, must be noted and described in field books or in some other manner to preserve evidence of their location. Photographs are well suited for this purpose, especially when taken systemically and supplemented with a sketch. In the event of litigation, the surveyor, by the evidence that is relied on, must be prepared to prove the location of the property description. Field notes and other records of field evidence are presented to support the surveyor's opinion of boundary location. If photographs are taken, they should be referenced to the survey line whenever possible. And then field notes in general, and we can go through this list of 16. Date, name, address, names of party personnel, weather conditions, equipment used, legal description, or name of parcel being surveyed, work order number, purpose of survey, north arrow, description of monuments, measurements actually made, corrected distances and angles, description of monuments set and ties taken to features, relation of possession to surveyed lines, outline of parcels surveyed, properly highlighted in pencil, sketch of parcel staked showing important features, oath of witnesses, evidence, where applicable, names and addresses of adjoiners, old residents if available, and reference to any record relied on or called for. So let's just throw it back out to everybody. We talked about how we line our crews out. What is your expectation of the crews, or what are they giving you back? Looks like we lost Connie, but go ahead, Jerry.
Let me just toss in a comment here. I did 3 different sessions at the conference in Nevada this April. 2 and they were primarily for technicians. 2 of them were extremely well attended. They were on common, rules of construction for technicians and for field procedures and error analysis. The one that was very poorly attended was on field notes. Nobody wants to take field notes anymore. Everybody says we can capture all that stuff in the data collector. And they don't understand that there's some things you cannot capture reliably in a data collector. There's still a place for field notes out there. So we're seeing, even though you got all this laundry list of stuff here, a lot of them aren't relying or are real resistive or don't see the reason for a lot of this stuff.
I agree. I'm always getting after my crews, so that orange sheet we use has a whole section for them to respond in, right? And I expect a sketch, I expect pictures. We have invert notes and level notes and control sheets, and we have a whole slew of sheets that should be going in that field note book. But often all I get back is, because we use fill to finish in all our surveying, so I get, well, the data collector will draw it all. I know it's correct because I can see it on my screen, and then I get a note on the orange sheet, completed survey as requested. And then I pull up the survey, And for example, that one I just showed, right, where when I went back with the client and we searched for that southeast corner of the property, he showed us where the rebar and cap was. But if I were to look at the field crew data, there were no points in the area. In any of the other corners where they didn't find monuments, there was no notes in the corner. Search for southeast corner of property. Nothing found. Right? They didn't even say that they searched it, and I have no points there. I have no evidence they actually went out to it. I mean, we're going back to the original GLO surveys where they're sitting in the bar drinking and writing up field notes. At that point, as far as I'm concerned. So Jerry, I'm all on board. There is a topic for that I could yell at everybody for. Write field notes, please.
When I taught in a fuller surveying program before I was teaching part-time here at UWP, the very first class of surveying, no data collectors at all. It was all field notes for all the field operations that we did. We didn't introduce data collectors until at least no sooner than the second surveying class than that. When I was teaching here, to make things a little bit simple for the students, I put up a little weather station outside the instrument room window so they can get the temperature and the pressure for the outside, conditions that they could record in their notes. 99% of them wouldn't write it in their notes. They'd take a picture of it with their smartphone, take a picture of that, and then that would be their information that they would record. And it's tough with people that are raised on technology like that to think in an analog fashion of recording information, but it's still important. And by God, don't let me erase in the field book for goodness sakes. I'm anti-erasing in the field book, so.
That's why I only use pen, and my engineers like the erasable pen so they can change their notes. And I'm like, what? I yell at them all the time. You shouldn't be erasing stuff. Well, I make mistakes. I'm like, so mistakes happen. Don't erase it.
I provide them the field books, the field book pages, and the pencils, and I cut off all the erasers off the pencils. They have to use my pencils.
I love it.
And I think, some of the field note stuff can be a little bit subjective from the areas you work in as well, right? I mean, we're definitely spoiled in the West where we can, I look at like number 10, right? Corrected distances and angles. Well, I mean, that's out in the West. That's not necessarily something we're keeping notes on in the field book or anything anymore. Everything's, so much GPS observation.
I think a lot of this is still written from a very traditional viewpoint. And we have to look at field notes as augmenting digital data collection.
Right.
I don't think one necessarily replaces the other, but they need to work together. There are some things that are easier to capture in field book than it is to try to do it with a data collector, and vice versa. Obviously, it's more accurate to collect the information directly off the instrument in a digital sense than it is to read the dial and write it all down and have a transcription there and that type of thing. But we got to look at the field notes as being an augmentation type of thing that goes with the digital data collection.
Yeah, and I think like, number 8, where we use, we still print out paper maps. We use the paper maps as our field notes, right? So it's like description of monuments called for. And I mean, we're writing down, point number 6051, right? And found 2-inch LCAP PLS, yada, yada, yada. So, and then we'll do a search for not found, right? SNF on all of those kind of corners as well. But I think, some of this, it's unfortunate, but some of this is still fundamentals and some of it still needs to be updated to, 2022 to some degree. But
yeah, I'm thinking like number 10 there, Trent. You said corrected distance and angles. It's not a big GPS thing, but set base station, point number, whatever, nail in asphalt at, church parking lot next door, point number 2000, and then calibrated to point 1 and point 2. Here's my residuals, right? The corrected angles distance will throw your residuals in from your calibration if you're localizing in that fashion to 2 known points, right?
Yeah. How about another one that needs to be kind of 16, right? Name and addresses of adjoiners. We just click on every GIS system now, unless you're of course in California, but you're not getting a whole lot of ownership in California, but to some of them, but a lot of that's at our fingertips just with, new technology, right? And so.
Yep. And I'm okay. I mean, like Jerry's saying, like they weren't writing the temperature down. But I'm okay if you've got your data collector and I showed you those pictures of monuments, geotag that monument. There's actually a lot more metadata that comes with that, right? Time, location. That I think that's great. That's a great use of technology to supplement a traditional field book. But I'm also thinking of, I've got a drafter that may not be able to get out to that job site. Why don't you describe some of the more difficult things you shot, or why you shot it that way, or do a sketch? I think, what if I've got to go up against John Stahl in court and my field crew said, completed survey was requested, and all of a sudden I've got to come up with this evidence to resolve it. Well, that's the thing that we have to convey to them is why it's important. They see it as they've got a product to get out, which is a completed field survey. As licensed surveyors, we've got a product to get out, which is a completed survey, but we also have a product to get out, which is protecting ourselves and resolving a boundary properly. And neither the client or the field crews necessarily care about that second half of that.
I think one question that people need to be really concerned with is, what the evidence is that they're collecting. Yes, we got a picture. Yes, we got a field note, a topo note sheet that the guys are writing down in the field. We need to make sure that they both match. I mean, I find myself doing that all the time where I look at the topo notes or field notes that the guys actually take, and there's a discrepancy in a number, and I'll find it if I have the picture and B, I have the field note to confer. That's evidence. And so that right there to me is evidence that they were out there in the field, and I can be secure about what they found if I have a picture to back it up and the notes that they took it out in the field. That just proves that they went out and did their due diligence.
Yeah, and I wonder, like the disparity between equipment in today, right? Like as much as there maybe was when some of these original books were done, right? Where there were still ones at the time when the first version of this, right? I think 1961 or something. I forget what the actual year was, but I mean, the disparity of equipment when this first version was written, and some of this still not necessarily getting updated with as it goes on, but there was a difference between chaining and plumb bobbing and T2s versus maybe somebody running the very first EDM that came out, 5-6 years later type of thing or something. But where today the disparity between equipment is whether we're running a 1-second gun or somebody's running a 3-second gun, right? Or the GPS receivers pretty much. And again, that's the disparity between, especially on a call like this where we have so much East and West Coast people, right? Like the practices in the East Coast where they're cutting line and running through marshlands and everything else, and maybe not running GPS, where again, we're spoiled in the West. So yeah,
when we talk about the sources of error and measurements, I mean, there's
exactly.
the measurements themselves, the errors and all that kind of stuff we're measuring. But the field book is a real good example of a traditional field book because you're copying on there. Exactly. On the left-hand side generally is where your measurements are and you're running calculations. On the right-hand side is where all of your support information is. So when you talk about your sources of error, instrumentation, personnel, and the instrument person and the equipment, it's all right there on the field book.
Right.
So my contention would be that, the things evolve, we change. We don't do tape transit anymore. We're doing GPS and that type of thing, but we still should be capturing the data in a fashion that allows us to identify those different sources of errors, whether it's all captured in the data collector or a combination of the data collector and the field books. And as Teresa was saying before, there's some things that are easier, like a graphic, a sketch, to jot down very quickly and annotate or make a correction for in a field book than it is in a data collector. But the thing you got to remember is you got to keep those connected somehow. So once the project ends, all that information is still recoverable if you do wind up in court. So whether it's in the field book or a data collector, some combination of both, there has been a separation of that information and it's gotten lost because it's in two different physical formats now.
So, Jerry, Adrian, we talked about Roundtable Tuesdays to bring it back. I think there's our first topic. Field notes for a roundtable discussion.
Absolutely. And so once our project's done, we'll scan in, we'll keep it as we need to, but then we actually scan it in electronically too. So we actually have 2 copies of the field data. Yep.
There is actually on this topic, there was a good kind of discussion on geoholics. It's probably been a year ago or a year, maybe even close to 18 months ago, but there was a full like roundtable discussion on field notes as well. But you had different topics, and then I have an article on that as well.
Yeah, it was almost 2 years ago because I listened to it with my crew chief as we drove down to the Utah conference. Not this year, but in 2021.
Yeah.
Because we kept pausing it. It's like a 4.5 hour drive from here to St. George where our conference is. And we kept pausing it, and I kept saying, see, I'm not the only one that says this.
Right. I'll throw the link to that particular article in the chat real quick. But
that'd be great. Jumping over then, I mean, the rest of this talks about then preserving it, like Jerry was just saying, how to preserve it on the face of a survey, preserve it in your field book. But 1127, assembling the data, 1128, computations. And again, some of these computations get a little bit more loose with the GPS era versus, traversing with a total station and correcting angle errors and closing it out and things like that. 1129, platting. Every property survey should result in the preparation and delivery of a report or plat, whether or not it is to be recorded. And that's going to change state to state, but most states have some sort of recording or filing requirement to set record and notice that the survey has been done. Some determination has been made. 1130 in the conclusion. After a surveyor has concluded the necessary research, has completed the field search, and is satisfied that no other evidence can be found, computations can be finalized and the platted positions of known corners and facts be reduced to the plat. Conclusions about the validity of found monuments, where new monuments should be reset, and where boundary lines belong should be addressed and finalized as part of the job. This requires skill and judgment, and at times might require courage. The boundary surveyor's ability for concluding and expressing an opinion on the location of boundary lines based on the evidence recovered and then interpreted marks the distinction between the professional land surveyor and the technician. To arrive at a proper conclusion, it is essential to understand completely the problem at hand and the object of the survey. And I think that's a question we've gone back in circles, right? When enough is enough. And I think that 1130 paragraph right there that says it, right? That's a difference. Takes a little bit of courage, and finally you just got to hit done on the survey. But that's the difference between the professional and the technician. And then presentation of results, final report, conference with the client, completing the survey, forms of survey results, the surveyor's report, and a final record of survey or plat of survey, whatever it is. That's what it is. How do we report it? I think we've talked quite a bit about this. And then Trent highlighted that last principle 21. The surveyor should conduct each survey as if it will ultimately be contested in court. Although there are no assurances that a survey will never be questioned, the surveyor should never take for granted that the utility survey will remain without question indefinitely. Every utility should be conducted to that degree of skill and professionalism in anticipation that at some future time the survey will be questioned by the former client one who may be in privity with the client, or another surveyor.
Which we've had this conversation lots of times, right? When that survey leaves your desk, is it defendable? And so goes to that same principle 21, right? Ultimately will be contested in court. So
absolutely.
David, you said you want to talk about some record of surveys or something. Did you want to talk about that?
One thing I was going to talk about right here is that you will be defending that boundary for the rest of your life.
Right.
It will come back. I've seen them come back years later even, and come back and have to pull out the file again to figure out what happened, what did I do, where did we do it, which is where the surveyor's report comes in and so handy. That was one thing I learned early on in my career, was that you will be defending that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
One thing that we find here with record of surveys in Orange County is that we wonder how many surveyors out there topo or locate lines of possession to help them determine where the boundary lines, lot lines, parcel lines are actually at. We ask for surveyors. We have a statement that we put on record of surveys and the corner records that I deal with on a daily basis that says that they have looked at lines of occupation, and it says that they do not vary from the boundary lines established on this map. It doesn't say by how much they vary, but just says that they've actually looked at it. And I've had plenty of surveyors come back at me angrily and say, no way, I'm not putting that note on there at all. Not just no, but hell no, I'm not doing that at all, because I was not hired to add lines of possession onto my survey at all. So then what does that make you doing? Are you just staking a deed then? A deed line? A lot line? I throw that out there for the group.
I see John giggling over there.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
That's like the grenade and walking it out. Drop the grenade and walk out.
Yeah.
I might have been one of those people who yelled at Dave that I'm not going to put that statement on a map.
You've never done that to me yet.
We always do consider lines of possession. I just don't like singling those out as a statement on a map, which then increases the liability on our end. So, but having said that, we always look at lines of possessions as a matter of fact. Today, I was just explaining to a new technician to always give me at least one of the printouts with the topo underneath it, and went through with him about how to review the lines of possession, and just kind of gave him a half an hour training session about what it is that I look for, any oddities, any easements, anything that doesn't make sense as far as common sense check. In this case, it was a relatively simple survey with a couple of commercial lots on the east and west side and streets at the north and south. But lately, I have a lot of projects that are on Caltrans properties, and in some areas, the Caltrans has hopefully acquired rights to that property by prescription, because there is no deed or right-of-way maps of any kind. So it's frequently that on those maps, we locate the fence, and I call them evidence of. I think the note that I was putting on a map today wasn't even evidence of possession, but evidence of use for roadway purposes. And then, up to somebody else to decide how that affects title.
It might be semantics, but I don't like possession. I like occupation. Mm-hmm. They've been occupying up to this point, which is a point of evidence for me, and that's the way I present it on a map.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. Actually, I use word occupation too. I got carried away with a note in here. So
Yeah. But I agree with you, Connie. David, if you asked me to put that type of note in my survey, we have a couple of words, but it's that liability side, right? I'm presenting evidence, but I don't want to make any certifications to that.
yeah.
So doesn't it give you a warm fuzzy feeling though when you topo a fence and it matches where your boundary is at?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll even
Okay.
call that out,
All
the
right.
fence follows property line,
Yeah.
but a separate certification. And I don't know the history or the exact note, but that's
Right.
I could see Connie's point there.
So I put on there that, this survey doesn't constitute an opinion on any rights of possession or prescriptive rights. But let's say I found all four corners, versus whatever, that all lines surveyed here on are not contradictory to the record and there's no material discrepancies. I mean, I'll certify to something that is actually there, but why would I certify to that occupation, or to something I don't know, Dave?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a big deal to me. If I don't know who owns that fence, I'm not going to tell you who owns the fence,
It is right up until a boundary is established where it's not in the right place.
Yeah.
And it was looked at originally as being, it was established by one surveyor as being in the right place because they were looking at fences. And then it turns out it was not in the right place by feet. And then when your county surveyor gets called into court to verify that and explain to the judge why the county surveyor isn't checking every one of these record of surveys and corner records that comes into their office, and you say, not my job. And the judge says, don't care. It puts a little bit of fear into you. So
yeah, no, I will send you any exhibits you want. I will even include in the surveyor's narrative that
right.
I considered lines of occupations as a part of determining my boundary, but as a separate statement on the boundary, and I forget exact language that was suggested. This was about a year ago. I was looking at that language and saying I'm not putting that particular statement on a map. So it doesn't mean that they're not considered or that I cannot offer evidence that they have been considered.
Yeah, I agree with the narrative because that's, again, I'm narrating my process and the evidence gathered and evidence found. Mm-hmm. And so when the evidence found adds to my determination of a property line, it does get added in, or if it doesn't, right, it gets noted as a rejected evidence for whatever reason. I could, the narrative there, which ends up kind of following my surveyor certificate because it's all part of that same kind of text group that I end up stamping, right?
And the narrative is great as long as surveyors do it.
Yep.
It's pulling that out and pulling that out of them to get them to put it on there. So
yeah, which gets down to that. I mean, we've gone back up to field notes here, and Trent highlighted the relation of possession to surveyed lines. There's a field note, right? The field crew notices a discrepancy there. Let's point it out. But if you go back down, the surveyor's report, the narrative, the certification, all that stuff that goes on the face of the survey, we've talked at length in this discussion, in previous weeks about that narrative and how we defend ourselves on the face of it. At the very beginning, we even talked about a surveyor's report, and I can't remember who it was. Was it someone from Indiana showed they actually have the report, a multi-page document that had a lot in it, and what I do as I learn from my mistakes, if I have to go back over an old survey and remind myself how I did it, I start taking notes in my book on the face of plats, on the face of deeds. As I'm retracing those, I start making notes on those to remind myself what I did, how I rotated it, how I, rejected or looked at it, overlaps, how I resolved overlaps and gaps, or whatever it might be. I become, I've started taking a surveyor's report that's just for myself so that 2, 3, 10 years from now, I don't have to spend 2 weeks going back through everything. And why the hell did I do that? I don't know what I was thinking. Versus, oh, now I can pull it up and remind myself how I got to where I did.
I've started getting into a habit. So our process is after I analyze the boundary and I create what's called a mapping based drawing, which is understood to be a final field boundary that's been analyzed and then released for engineering to use or whoever. I've started placing a boundary narrative and any additional notes into the paper space of that particular drawing, because I've discovered if I put it in paper space, then pretty much nobody but me will know it's there. But then I will immediately, when I pull up that drawing, I will know which tab to look at and get the information for myself. And I'm actually kind of pushing a little bit to try and implement that as a standard practice within the company. You know, so we will have the boundary narrative, the datum and basis of bearings, and potentially links to additional documents, or at least a description where to find the information. So that's what I've been doing lately.
I like that. I've made notes in paper space or model space. We call it a boundary calc file or BC file, right? And that ends up being the base for design or for my, what our survey drafters will pull it out of there, reference that into their survey drawing, right? So there's no one messing with my lines once they're established. But I've put notes in there to remind myself or to clue in on things when we come back to it. I like it.
Mr. Stahl's been unmuted.
He's ready. Go for it,
He's
John.
ready. He's been chomping at the bit.
That's been a great discussion. Great discussion.
Yeah.
I would personally be hesitant to focus on any particular one type of evidence, whether it be survey markers, as documents, deeds, fences, all of those. They're all just evidence. And we can glean from that evidence certain facts. And that's really the important part, is our analysis of the evidence and the facts that were determined from that analysis. And to me, it doesn't seem that there shouldn't be any focus or attention on, oh, that's just an occupation line, or that's just a surveyor's marker, or